This is the CFL This Week.
That's right. You are listening to the Ticats Audio Network. This is, of course, another edition of the CFL This Week, where we have, again, put together a solid roundtable of folks here to talk about the game we love. That is the Canadian Football League. And you know what? I'm really excited about this program because we have three people, as I always say, that have something to say, have some opinions. So let's get right at it. So, hey, let's start off with the man who has the Manitoba sports scene covered to a T. They call him the Hustler. He's from Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. His name is Andrew Paterson. Thank you for joining us, Andrew.
Bubs, my pleasure. Great to chop it up with you guys. Talk a little CFL after another great weekend in the league, and certainly around these parts in the center of Canada, a lot of people fired up about this Bomber team now 6-1 on the season, heading into the bye week.
You know, when you look at his resume, and it's extensive, folks, I'm going to call him the Triple Crown winner of the Canadian Football League. I know of no one that has covered the CFL for all three networks. And of course, that being Sportsnet, TSN, and going way back into the day, The Score. He also contributes to TSN.ca. I changed that. That would be CFL.ca. James Cybulski. Thanks for joining us, James.
Bubs, what's happening, man? It's funny. I feel like I'm probably one of the few people that can lay claim to covering three different CFL franchises. So basically covering, a third of the league at various points between the British Columbia Lions, the Toronto Argonauts, and the Ottawa Rough Riders. Well, I guess they're the Redblacks now. But there you go.
Hey, Sportsnet, sportsnet.ca. Again, I keep saying TSN, but the CFL.ca. And I think someone that could lay claim to besting Matthew Shinati as the most stylish sportscaster I know, his name is Donnovan Bennett. Thanks for joining us, Donnovan.
Listen, I just want to be better at Matt Shinetti at everything. So I will take it in fashion, any category. I should try and race him. I just want to be a little bit better than him at everything. But you started this off by saying we have a solid panel. I think it's because I brought us down a little bit. If this was Brody Lawson in this box, not me, it would be an excellent panel. So I'm just happy that you guys are willing to put up with me.
Yeah, if you shook it up and changed it to Gary Lawless, Brody Lawson, and
Lawless is out.
Matthew Shinetti, yeah, and Matthew Shinetti, then we're upgrading it, right?
Okay, guys.
Sorry, Hustler.
The Hustler, love this. Now, hey, during the halftime of the Tiger Cats and Stampeders game, panelists on TSN, Matthew Dunnigan called it the worst half of football that he has seen in his time of covering this league. And it kind of got me to thinking of the low scoring in this league, some of the quarterback play in this league. And then I was really kicked in the butt by watching some of the madness we saw in the National Football League. Now, I'm not looking for a comparison of the two leagues, but is there a problem with the league? And we're talking about the Canadian game in terms of scoring, offense, and last-second excitement. I'll start with you, James.
I think there's a talent issue right now with the Canadian Football League. And, I think there's also a continuity element as well. So, keep in mind that a lot of these teams went, a year and a half, almost 2 years without playing. So for one, that's changed the landscape. I think an interest certainly has had an impact on that from a general perception standpoint. And I think right now, and I think this has been a problem for a number of years lately, is, who's the best player in the league, right? And I don't know if you can really crystal clear point that out in terms of your star players and even with one particular guy, but it's a revolving door. And it's really hard with the continuity these days, where the way that the NFL has changed things and evolved, particularly in the last 15 years, a lot of those great players, a lot of those star players in the CFL, guys that we grew up with, guys that we watched set the league on fire, they're not coming up here anymore, right? They're playing in the NFL now. And it may sound a little dated in some respects, but if you look back, 15 years ago, is Kyler Murray playing in the NFL, or is he playing in the CFL 15 years ago in the mid 2000s? right? Kyler Murray was probably more up here. Baker Mayfield was probably a quarterback that was more designed based on his size and skill set to be up here than being south of the border, being a first overall pick. So those are just a couple of examples. A Justin Fields for that matter. Guys who had that mobility, we don't see that as much now with the star players. That kind of set the world on fire up here for such a long time, that Doug Flutie sort of mold. But guys who have that mobility, and now you're seeing more of a lot of drop back passers now. It's out of that traditional mold of what the prototype NFL quarterback was. Those are kind of more the guys that you're seeing up here. Guys, I don't know if I'm completely out to lunch on this, but I do think it's had an impact, a cyclical effect on the NFL or on the Canadian Football League product now for probably 12 to 15 years and longer.
Well, let me jump in, Bubba, because I agree with one thing you said, Cybulski, in terms of the way the game has changed and the players that would be playing in the CFL. We use the Sunday Nighter this week as an example. Lamar Jackson.
Great example.
Wide receiver in the NFL, or he's playing in the CFL. He's basically Damon Allen before Damon Allen.
You're right.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's not an every down back in the NFL 20, 25, 30 years ago. The Honey Badger. Is he playing safety in the NFL 30 years ago? Probably not. So multiple positions, all players that would have played in the CFL, because the college game has now become the NFL game. A lot of those guys find success. But in terms of the start to this year and, some of the play that we've seen, I chalk it up to you've had a rotating door of who's playing quarterback for multiple teams. You didn't have a preseason really at all. You didn't have a season a year ago. So quite frankly, I think the football is actually better than I expected, given all of those things coming in. And some of the things that make games exciting, whether it was Chargers, Cowboys this week, or even to a certain extent, Ravens, Chiefs, a lot of it was because of mistakes, because of bad football, quite frankly. You can't tell me that the Chargers Cowboys game, it was exciting, but also some terrible coaching, some terrible decision-making.
But it was close, Donnovan, and that's what we've seen in the first 2 weeks, right? I mean, we've seen insane, like you look at the 4:00 starts for all you Easterners out there, 1:00 here for us on the West Coast. But look at how those games last night finished out. Cowboys, Chargers go right down with a 56-yard walk-off, right? You look at Minnesota and Arizona goes down to a missed field goal. You look at another one goes down to overtime. Then you get to the Sunday Nighter last night with the Chiefs and the Ravens, Mahomes and Lamar. And how does that play out on primetime audience? Drama. Hey, lots of mistakes and screw ups, but everything goes down to the wire. So you're kind of walking away going, man, these games are BANANAS, right? And it was the same thing in week 1, where here we are with the Canadian Football League. Were these games all tight this past weekend? Not really. I mean, sat out on Saturday night. I mean, I watched the double dip, and, Edmonton flirted for a little while, but the Bombers were still the Bombers at the end of the day. That Lions D looks pretty good this year, and ultimately they were the better team, and they looked like the better team throughout the game.
Andrew, you're ready to explode.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about this conversation right now, and CEO mentioned, with a couple of the games, the primetime games in the National Football League could not have been scripted by Vince McMahon to have any more insanity and drama. I mean, it goes right back to the Cowboys-Bucks game in the first week of the season, all the way to last night's epic game between the Chiefs and Ravens. The CFL hasn't had that. I mean, early on, there was a few games that came right down to the wire, but they weren't, these 30-29 games you'd remember the Canadian Football League. It was 21-20. The biggest story, man, we've been talking about it throughout week 1, has been the totals. I mean, from a betting standpoint, the numbers you're seeing on these games are so much lower than, we're used to seeing the Canadian Football League. And I mean, to me, it comes back. I'm with you on the talent challenge right now. And I think there's a lot of unique things that affect the league right now at this time and the amount of time off. But to me, it really comes down to the quarterback play. And I mean, Mike Riley at the beginning of the season had a rubber arm. I mean, we all remember those ducks that he was throwing and somehow getting out there. He's coming back. Obviously, Trevor Harris is out. And the quarterback situation in Calgary has been unbelievable. And I know you guys talked about how bad that week of football, the game was, and the first half in particular. I mean, Dickinson talked about Bo Levi afterwards and has been about as critical as he's been of an MOP player as we've heard in his career. So, I mean, to me, asked about who the best player in the league is. I mean, the first guy that comes to mind isn't a quarterback. It's Willie Jefferson right now. And, you know, in some ways, I think the defensive players and the defensive stars of this league, I think, are a little bit more set to do what they do right now than really getting that, you know, well-oiled offense with so many pieces going in and out so far this season due to injury as well as other factors.
Well, I think the best quarterback or the best player in the league for me has been Zach Collaros, and it's because he's been healthy. Look at the premier, and it's crazy to think Zach Collaros is the QB who's been healthy, but look at the premier QBs in the league. Mike Riley in and out of the lineup, rubber arm now starting to look healthy. Bo hasn't been healthy. Trevor Harris now not healthy. Dane Evans, Masoli, not healthy. Nick Arbuckle, started the year, not healthy. Matt Nichols has had forever to get his shoulder right. Didn't look healthy, didn't play well. So you've got the known commodities in terms of quarterbacks. A lot of them have been on the IR.
And not only that, I mean, that's a lot of money that's sitting there idle right now across the league, right? I mean, Mike Riley at $700,000 a year in terms of what and now obviously there was some restructuring and all that. And, you know, you look at what happened in 2020 and, you know, some of the grievances that he had with the team, but you look at how that's played out. Bo Levi Mitchell at 31 now, we're talking about a guy who, you know, 4 years ago was set to rewrite the CFL record book and was going to flirt with maybe being the greatest quarterback in CFL history. Remember the whole conversation that, you know, he was going to take his talent south. He was ultimately going to go explore the NFL, and he stayed. And what's happened, right? I mean, here was a guy who went, you know, he's had a hard time staying healthy now in the last 2 seasons that he's played. And in fairness to Bo, look, he's coming off a broken leg, right? I mean, like in some respects, and I'm a huge Dave Dickinson guy, but he's coming off a broken freaking leg and getting back into the lineup here and getting called out by his coach. Hey, look, you're paying Bo a lot of money to perform. I get it. And it's results-driven business, and no league, and I said this for years, no league defines a what have you done for me lately attitude more than the Canadian Football League, more so than the NFL, more so than Major League Baseball, more so than the NHL. I mean, you can have a guy who's an MOP 1 year and effectively be almost out of the league or be traded in the offseason, right? And we've seen this happen throughout the history of the CFL. But right now, Bo's not good enough. I don't think Mike Riley's been good enough, quite frankly, this year. And, you know, if he's not healthy, maybe he doesn't play. He's looked better, obviously, as of late. But, you know, Hustler, you touched on it, man. Like, you look at that rubber arm at the start. You're paying a lot of money to guys who just have not performed to the expectation or to the financial expectations for some of these guys. And, you know, Zach Collaros, who would have thought a guy who was a perpetual injured list player has been the healthiest of all those names we've talked about this year. Zach freaking Collaros is the healthy one.
They're keeping his jersey clean up front.
It wasn't really fair for Zach. I mean, they were, you know, ACL injuries, concussions after being hit by, you know, particular players. So, I mean, a lot of it wasn't really his fault. Or maybe it was some.
But they are. But I mean, ultimately, an injury is an injury, though, right, Bubs?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, listen, and from a Bomber perspective, you know, you got Jamarcus Hardrick and Stanley Bryant up there leading the way. I mean, they've done a great job. They know that they're screwed if Zach Collaros gets hurt. I mean, with all due respect to Sean McGuire, who's kind of come into the Strevler role, and he'll, you know, have 5 carries for 5 yards and 3 touchdowns in a game. If he's back there throwing the football, this team is probably not going to win a Grey Cup.
Can you think of a time that there has been a greater dearth of backup quarterbacks in recent memory in the CFL?
Well, it's pretty. It's stark. It's stark comparison from team to team.
Like it drops off for most. I mean, though, right?
And hey, we saw Jake Mayer. I mean, Jake Mayer, and no one knew who this guy was. He came in and he balled out. I mean, he, you know, if anything, they maybe didn't have the success in the red zone that they needed. But I think of that game here in Winnipeg that came right down to the end. I mean, the Bombers maybe kept Calgary in with some drops, but I mean, he showed up and played very well. But I mean, just with Calgary in particular, part of the reason why I think they were so frustrated with their performance on the weekend is that you have this golden opportunity going in, playing not a backup, a third string quarterback in Hamilton. And, you know, you need to take advantage of those opportunities. And for Calgary, who in a lot of ways had saved their season with their win against Edmonton on the road the week before, That was a real setback for a team that has a much, much higher standard than they've been playing to so far this year.
We've actually transitioned into what really our second topic was. Amazingly, this is great, guys. In Bo Levi Mitchell, 16 out of 28, 170 yards, no touchdown passes. He did throw the one pick to Simone Lawrence that ended up in the end zone and was the go-ahead score for the Tiger Cats. And you talked about Dave Dickinson, the head coach, calling him out, saying that he needed to elevate his game. And to be fair, he said he needed to elevate his game as a head coach as well, too. Hey, he's 31 years old. I thought it was amazing to me that with 2 minutes left on the clock and the team still down by a score and a bit, that they pulled Bo Levi Mitchell. In the CFL, at times you could score 14 points in a minute. Was that benching fair or foul, Donnovan?
I think it was fair. Your first responsibility is to the football club, and nobody is above that, including the quarterback. And you know who knows that better than anybody? Dave Dickinson. Because Dave Dickinson was the best player in the league. And when Casey Printers gave the team a better opportunity, he got to play. And so Dave, learning from Wally Guano, understands that you have to own the entire locker room and you can't consider, well, how much are we paying this player and how will this player feel? And I actually love the response from both. I love the fact that Bo Levi Mitchell said, well, no, I'm not happy with it. I feel like I should be in there. I'm a competitor, which is why he's on the field. And let's not imagine that part of the reason why Bo Levi Mitchell is on the field, is probably still not healthy, is because he felt like, man, this backup's pretty good. This backup is coming in and setting records, not winning games, but he's spraying it all over the field. I need to go and keep my job. And so that's the kind of internal competition that you want. So I felt it was a fair decision. In Bo, yes, he's 31, but when you look at the investment in him, look at the investment of Riley, that's coming off an era where we had Damon Allen, Ricky Ray, Anthony Calvillo, Henry Burris, all quarterbacks who late into their 30s, if not 40s, played winning football. So these teams are saying, okay, we can put that money into right now because we still think your best years ahead of you. And right now, it looks like that previous generation was an anomaly based off of what we're seeing from the older guys, and Bo being one of them right now.
James?
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective, it speaks to the urgent nature of where they are in the season. I mean, does that happen in week 2? Well, maybe not. But, I mean, they were 1-4. They got off the mat, got that win against Edmonton. And then you had this golden opportunity to go in and try and get to 3-4 in a sweet spot against a third-string quarterback making his first start. And, I mean, they were brutal. And, from Dickinson's perspective, you're now staring at 2-5 right now. Last place in the West. Saskatchewan and BC both have 4 wins. We're at that midway point of the season, guys. So, listen, Bo is their guy. They will ride with him. But in a situation, in an eminently winnable game like Friday night where it wasn't happening, can't blame Dickinson for making the call that he did.
Well, like this is a bit of a carryover to me from what we saw in 2019 with Bo Levi, right? I mean, I think we saw a few cracks in the armor in 2019 with how he performed and how this is now carried over. Look, he's got 7 picks this year. Like Bo Levi Mitchell's got 7 interceptions. And he's got two touchdowns this season. It's not good enough, right? Like you're talking about a guy who, was in 4 Grey Cups in the first 5 years he appeared in the CFL, right? I mean, he set the world on fire.
He was 12-0 versus the Tiger Cats.
That's it. I mean, his starter record. I mean, it was everything. He had the greatest winning percentage of any quarterback to start in the league. I mean, look, his winning percentage as a quarterback, as a starter in the CFL is off the chart. But look at him right now. And, he's 31. Like, I certainly am not going to reenact the movie Old Yeller and take him around back for all of our older fans out there. Why that movie's not on Disney Plus is beyond me. I don't know, right? Teach some kids some hard lessons. But the point is Bo Levi is just simply not good enough, right? I mean, he is not good enough by his standards and what we expect from Bo Levi Mitchell on a day-to-day basis in the Canadian Football League. And the numbers don't lie.
Let me push back on that a little bit. Because is he not good enough, or is that team not good enough?
Oh, no, for sure.
When you talk about that run that they made to consecutive Grey Cups, look at the receivers
Oh,
that they would
unbelievable.
trot out, the depth that they had. Now
And
look
they're all
at where
gone.
they're playing. A lot of them are playing elsewhere. Half of them are playing in Toronto. And then you got that second half where Kamar Jordan's out of the lineup with the hamstring. You're looking around and thinking, okay, well, who is going to separate? Who's going to make a play? And you talk about those 7 picks. Bo, he would often have picks being too aggressive, pushing the ball down the field, reading high-low. Now, I wonder if he got pulled only because Dave Dickinson's like, what on my play sheet can I call? Because he doesn't have the ability to push the ball down the field in the same way. And so a lot of those picks are in tight windows when guys aren't making plays for him. So I think it's partially him, but I think the talent around him, they for a long time felt like we can rebuild and reload and let guys go in free agency.
But part of that is ultimately, look, you know, he deserves to get paid, and the stars in the league and every league, they all get paid. So clearly, how did they allocate their resources, right? We're going to protect the franchise. We're going to pay the meal ticket. And they ultimately went with that with Bo, and at the cost of losing that infrastructure. I don't think that D is as mighty and vaunted as it was, say, 3 years ago. I don't think that core, that offensive line is as dominant, as solid as it once. Like, the mystique around the Calgary Stampeders is not there, right? Can we all agree on that? Like, collectively, the infrastructure that's around that team is not what it was 3 years ago. And it's falling onto Bo's shoulders. And quite frankly, you're right. Like, he doesn't have the help that he once did, but at the same time, I think there's an expectation, I think not only amongst the fan base, but when the organization to say, look, we're looking at you to do it. But the one thing you touched on this where, you know, pushing the ball downfield, Donnovan, Bo Levi Mitchell is one of the most confident players I have come across ever. Like, that guy does not lack for swag. And I think maybe for the first time as a professional, I think it's not there right now for him mentally.
Well, I think you could say that for the organization, guys. I mean, let's face it. Calgary has been the standard, at least through the regular season in the CFL. They haven't had a losing season in 15 years. And the big part of that is the quarterback position. They keep on cranking out elite level quarterbacking. And I think, honestly, Donnovan, you mentioned, I mean, all the exodus of those star receivers, I think there was a little bit of hubris in Calgary that, you know what, we'll just get other guys. We've got Bo Levi Mitchell. He's the guy that makes these receivers who they are. And I think it's a little bit of a wake-up call right now for Calgary that maybe it's not that easy. And as I said, they got 7 games to salvage this season, but they're in a very unfamiliar place right now at 2-5, needing probably to win 5 or 6 of their final 7 games to actually be in the postseason.
And if you hate, and listen, if you hate the Stampeders, like, enjoy this now. Like, how often do you see the Stampeders in the basement of the CFL West Division, right? Like, this is like a unicorn year potentially. So if you hate the Stamps, enjoy it.
I think we what we're seeing is philosophically, how do you build the champions, specifically offensively? And look at Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. We're investing in our offensive line. We're investing in our defense. We're investing in our running game. And we're going to hopefully have a quarterback that can make some plays for us. Whereas in BC, in Edmonton, and Calgary, we're investing in our quarterback. And that might mean we don't invest in our offensive line in BC, or we don't invest in our receivers in Calgary. But we're trusting the quarterback is going to be able to paper over those issues and make us win. And so we'll see what ends up.
Donnovan, do you guys not? But you know, to that effect. So I look at Vancouver as a market in the Canadian Football League, and I look at Winnipeg in a market. And Vancouver, in order to sell tickets, needs a shiny toy.
Yep.
Right. Where I think there's more of there's a need to pay a shiny star. Wherein I almost feel like, and a Hustler, you could probably speak to this because you're in the market, but the idea of paying, you know, building a team for a team, it's not just, you don't just need a sexy, shiny toy to sell a product for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, where you can just build more foundationally a more well-rounded team, if you will.
Yeah, you know, I mean, for a long time, there was the talk about the quarterback, but I mean, ever since Kyle Walters took over, he did 2 things. He identified the Canadian talent was incredibly lacking under Joe Mack, and they couldn't protect the quarterback, and those guys were getting killed. And the first thing they did was focus in on the Canadians and the offensive line. And to Donovan's point, I mean, they built this through how do we make a great team that can sustain itself and move forward? And, over the last few years, it's turned into that. They finally got, to the top of the mountain in 2019. And what's been so impressive about this season's team is that they've really continued that. But you're right. I mean, they're not signing guys so they can get on the front page of the paper here. I mean, people know what's up. I mean, they are excited about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a championship squad. And Zach Collaros is phenomenal. He's had a great time. But, I mean, he came in almost as an afterthought with 4 games left in that season. And it's been somewhat magical since then. But you're exactly right. When you sign an elite quarterback, it's going to cost you money. And you need quarterbacking to win. But unlike, maybe getting onto the front page and getting people talking about the Lions by a big splashy signing of Mike Riley, you don't have that PR need here, at least in Winnipeg.
You need it. Toronto, you look at the major urban centers, right? Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. It's you need that sugar rush effectively in order to sell tickets or to generate interest.
Some would argue winning games will do that for you if you actually put it together. But I mean, hey, let's face it, having a guy like Michael Riley helps you win some football games too.
Let's continue with this sort of Alberta quarterback talk here. Now, Trevor Harris out 6 weeks with a neck injury. Hustler, you saw their replacement in their, I guess, the 37-22 loss to the Bombers, Taylor Cornelius, Dakota Prokop. James, you just flashed a graphic there online of the Calgary Stampeders in last place.
That's technology. That is technology right there.
And it was quick. It was amazing the way you pulled it off without me even seeing you doing that. Now, are the Elks about to join the Stampeders at the bottom of the West, maybe even the bottom of the Canadian Football League? Hustler, continue with this one.
Well, it almost inconceivably, I think the answer is yes. They're 2-4 right now, and the timing of the Harris injury couldn't be any worse. I mean, you've got the Bombers, the class of the league right now, 3 times in 4 weeks, presumably all without Trevor Harris. Now, I thought Cornelius acquitted himself actually quite well. Obviously with the kicking issues for the Bombers and a couple turnovers, maybe made it a little closer earlier, but in the second half, the Elks had a lead. Now, a couple rookie mistakes cost them big time. The Alford, pick 6 really flipped that game, and that was pretty much it. But I mean, you look at the West right now, and Saskatchewan and BC both have 4 wins. The Bombers have 6. I think because of how weak Ottawa is right now, and the fact that those Eastern teams are going to be eaten up on the Redblacks, I don't think that there's a crossover this year. I think it's unlikely at this point. So, I mean, essentially, either Edmonton or Calgary is going to have to not only win their fair share of games, but do it and get above Saskatchewan and BC and get a tiebreaker. So, it was already not a great situation for Edmonton, but losing Harris at this point of the season, going into 3-4 against Winnipeg, they're in a very, very dire situation. And unless they can win some games without Trevor Harris while he's out, I don't think we'll be talking about the Elks in the postseason.
I think Cornelius does have the benefit of a really good receiving core, right? In terms of the veterans that are there that can help him out, but I just don't see how it's sustainable. Again, this goes back to, not to bring it all back to money again, but Edmonton has kind of followed the similar narrative that Calgary and BC have employed, right? Paying a lot of money for their number one. And, for Trevor Harris to go down, I was impressed. I liked what the Elks looked like at the beginning of the season with Trevor Harris. They responded well. The first sporting event I went to in who knows how long, but to go to BC Place Stadium about 6 weeks ago and watch Trevor Harris absolutely shred the Lions. They were impressive. That was an impressive looking group, but I just don't see how that's sustainable without Trevor Harris.
Yeah, I mean, it's too early, really halfway through the season to say that it's done for a couple of reasons. I mean, almost every team has had to go to 2 quarterbacks at some point, and we're going to continue to hopefully see, some depth at the position present itself. Taylor Cornelius, this is the first time really playing in the league. And
first time playing in almost 2 years, right, Donnovan? He was an XFL. The last time we saw Tyler Cornelius was in the XFL, and that was February of 2020. We're talking September of 2021 now.
Yeah, and traditionally, specifically in that franchise, you'd have backups that were there for a while. How long were they blessed with having Ricky Ray and Jason Moss on the same team together?
Yeah. Cody
So
Ledbetter, right? I mean, how long was he with that franchise? Like you had
Yeah.
that, but you had some continuity, I think,
Yeah.
what you're alluding to, Donnovan. Sorry.
Right. And you don't have that in the league. So, I mean, we could see quarterback injuries elsewhere that might change the landscape. I think the first three positions, barring a catastrophic injury in the West, are spoken for. It's just a matter of who is where. But I do think that the crossover is in play because what is Montreal? Like, does anyone have a good feeling on what Montreal is? Contender, not contender? And,
what's Vernon Adams?
What's Vernon Adams? And if Vernon Adams goes down again, what is Montreal? Because Pipkin's no longer there. So I think the crossover is in play if Edmonton can just, tread water for a little bit.
They run the ball very well. James Wilder it looks like a rookie James Wilder in some cases. So maybe they need to modify their offense, guys.
Where did, like, honestly, watching James Wilder, it was like, man, what a story, right? Like he bursts on the scene in the CFL, what was it, 5 years ago now? And was like the ultimate flavor of the month. And then
rookie of the year.
Yeah. And then almost disappeared, right? Like the cliff seemed boom. And to look at him, he looked in phenomenal shape, ran wild. He looked like Derrick Henry did yesterday, right? For against the Seahawks for the Titans. James Wilder looks sensational. Like honestly, he turned the clock back 5 years. Like it's like he had skipped that audition with the WWE and all of it.
You just mentioned that Montreal quickly. What is Vernon Adams and what are the Alouettes? The Alouettes are a very frustrating football team to watch if you're a fan of theirs. I mean, they almost ran up 500 yards of offense. I mean, it just could not get in the end zone on the weekend. I mean, at times Vernon Adams looks like he could be, truly a great star quarterback in this league. And then at times, a few mistakes, didn't get helped by the receivers a few times. And, but you got to put it into the end zone and get 6 if you want to win football games. And there were some huge missed opportunities for Montreal right now. And that's one of those games at the end of the year, Donnovan, if you're right, and they don't get the wins and they're on the outside looking in, it'll look no further than a game like this against the British Columbia Lions, a very winnable game on home field where you did a lot of things right, but you just didn't execute when you needed to get the 2 points.
Guys, the Ottawa Redblacks spent the bye week at 1-5. They've scored 80 points in their games, and they spent their time during the week shopping for players, especially on offense. They have signed a man by the name of Delvin Duck Hodges, who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers when Mason Rudolph and Ben Roethlisberger went down. Is he the savior, James?
Why? I don't want to throw dirt on the Redblacks. I mean, look at what I'm wearing today, for crying out loud, right? I'm trying to share some love for the 613. Look, like it's to me, it is a sucker's bet to try to throw somebody into the fire that has no CFL experience in hopes of trying to get in there right away, right? I mean, Donnovan, not to sit here, and I don't want to sit here and pump Bennett's tires too much here because he's got a big enough ego as it is. But the fact is, you look at quarterbacks that have had success in this league, they don't just walk in off the street and just set the world on fire, right? There's an acclimation period, right? You get acclimated with the league, you get acclimated with the dimensions of the field, you get acclimated with the offense, the personnel, and then you go in. And it's not to say that rookies have had success and guys have gone in. I mean, you look at Ricky Ray and all of it, but Ricky Ray had been in camp for a bit, right? The Bo Levi Mitchells had been in camp for a while. I just don't see how that is a recipe for success. I mean, this league, as much as some people like to knock it, this is a league that humbles you very quickly.
Vince Ferragamo. I'm showing my age, but Vince Ferragamo would be that guy.
So we've got an old Yeller reference and a Vince Ferragamo reference. What do you guys got?
Hey, I feel for our pal about Paul Appolise, who, just simply does not have the talent right now to compete with the rest of the teams in the Canadian Football League. And I mean, they would never admit it, but I mean, to me, the white flag's already gone up on 2021 for Ottawa.
Hey, Hustler, is there not a coincidence that everybody seemed to kind of jump ship coincidentally? Like, Rick Campbell was there was like, okay, Rick Campbell's leaving, and maybe it was time for the Rick Campbell era to go, but everybody kind of followed suit, right? Trevor Harris. I mean, like the Redblacks built a good thing, right? You had
Absolutely.
Trevor Harris, and just think like a couple of years ago,
there's
you
one
talk about the
common
two
denominator.
quarterbacks. You had Burris and Harris, right? And then, well, one retires, and understandably so, but Harris leaves, Ellingson, it's just like it's everybody who was anybody with that
Sir
team.
Vincent Rogers.
Wonderful. Yeah, Sir Vincent, the list goes on and on with all this great talent that they had assembled, and nobody felt the need or the desire to stay in an environment that, man, you look at what the fans and the market had created. I don't know if there's something behind the scenes there, but nobody seemed to want to stay. And it just seemed like a wonderful feel-good story with what they had created with the rebirth of the Redblacks.
Well, Donnovan, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it didn't seem like they wanted to pay the players what it was going to cost to keep them. I mean, all these guys are still in the league. They got nice raises elsewhere, and they're continuing to do what they did for Ottawa.
Effective.
Now Ottawa is missing those guys.
Yeah, Trevor Harris has been very candid about the fact that he didn't receive an offer that was commensurate with being a starting quarterback, and quite frankly, he didn't feel like he really received an offer. And so, in Hustler, you talked about the fact that there's no surprise because of the situation that they're in, because there hasn't been a lot of talent. There's no surprise. Like, we could have looked at that depth chart this summer and said, how are you going to move the football on offense? Where are your receivers? And then when Sinopoli retired, you really had questions. So the white flag, to me, it has been raised because you can't bring a quarterback in off the street who hasn't played this type of football and expect that's going to change your season. To me, that means you're evaluating Duck Hodges for the future. The unfortunate part is Duck Hodges is going to have to duck because that offensive line isn't blocking. They don't have receivers that could separate. And so we talked about hubris earlier. They went into 2019 thinking that they could, roll out a new starter after, Harris left, and that didn't go well. They, did the musical chairs with Arbuckle and Nichols, and that hasn't gone well.
I think the Redblacks are hoping for another lockdown. I think that's the only. Just shut it down. They're in lockdown. We can't play. Sorry.
But hold on, guys.
But also, they win week one, and Redblack Nation is like, why are we ninth? Put some respect on our name.
They had 80 yards of offense in the game.
Now you know why.
I heard the phrase, I think, James, you might have said it, shiny new toy. And, I'm confused a little bit. I mean, again, we talk about Devlin Hodges, and what does he know about the CFL? Can he throw a down and out with, realize the width of the field? Again, and I hate to bring this up because I know it's kind of old and tired in a sense, but, you got
confusing.
Maybe and confused. We got like a Michael O'Connor, okay, a guy that understands the Canadian game. Where are the Canadian quarterbacks? Why? And it's just a Canadian general manager, not an American general manager, right? Why are we looking at American quarterbacks that know nothing about the CFL and thinking that they could be the answer when there could be a couple of guys that played in youth sports or at least grew up in this Canadian environment, maybe went to the States and have come back? Why are these guys not getting a look?
Talent pool, depth, right? I mean, I think, look, as much as all of a sudden, I mean, this to me in my lifetime, I'm 46 now. I know I look like I'm 28, but there's the most amount of Canadian quarterbacks that are on rosters right now in my lifetime. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I can't think of this many Canadian quarterbacks that have been in the discussion about potentially getting a start or just being on a roster. I mean, it was kind of, it's almost like for the last quarter century or 30 years, like the great Canadian hope, like, oh, he's going to get a start. And, shout out to Julio Caravata, a colleague of mine, and, Larry Justanis, who kind of had that sort of mantra back in the 90s. But I don't know. I think there's still a stigma to have an American quarterback out there. And just honestly, look at how many schools there are south of the border.
But they've never played the Canadian. But they've never played the Canadian
Sure.
game. They don't have the Canadian roots. You've got a guy like Rourke out in BC that looks to me to be a guy that's got some potential. I mean, Donnovan, you saw a guy. You're a Western guy, Merchant. Where he's playing somewhere in Europe, like.
But Bubs, it's been. I mean, if you think about it, though, who's the last great Canadian starting quarterback in the CFL?
Because they've never had.
Sure, but like I think most people would probably default to Russ Jackson, right? And Russ Jackson's been retired from the CFL for I think 50 years, right? Like before I was born, and I'm a huge Russ Jackson fan, right? But before I was born, so you're talking about the last effective, really good Canadian starting quarterback in the league. I think we romanticize about the idea, and it's a nice idea. How many schools are there in the CIS and U Sports right now? I mean, Donnovan, I'll defer to you with but what is there? There's a dozen, there's
27.
less than 20, there's what?
27.
There's 27. Okay. Yeah. So so 27, but you're talking about you're trying to find a starting quarterback out of 27 schools where you go south of the border. I mean, for just Division 1A schools, you're talking about almost 120 schools right there, right? So right off the bat, then you can go to 1AA, and Division 2. So I think the talent pool is just far greater south of the border.
Yeah. So the interesting thing will there be, a penalty on some of the Canadians that are playing in the NCAA, who are part of that NCAA talent pool when they come north? Will people have a stigma toward them? This is a copycat sport. It's copycat business, and success begets success. When I was growing up, I would never in my lifetime think you're going to have multiple feature running backs that are Canadians. Andrew Harris, John Thomas Erlington, Irons looks great. Lumsden, had a respectable career. Messam was a beast for a while, right? So now it's not a thing to draft a running back, to feature him. We don't talk about it. Post Brent Johnson, how many teams said, well, why can't we have a Canadian defensive end that rushes the passer? So I think you're going to need someone literally to shatter that glass ceiling. And it might be Rourke, might be O'Connor, it might be Rourke's younger brother or Trey Ford in the CIS now. You're going to need someone to really have huge success. And then I think it'll come. Because James, you talked about marketing earlier. Yeah. The first franchise that has a starting quarterback that's a player, the marketing will go through the roof. It'll sell itself.
Well, doesn't it feel like a miss? Sorry, Hustler, but doesn't it feel like a miss on the league's part with Brandon Bridge? And look, not to say that Brandon Bridge was a star, but there was no ratio credit given for that at the quarterback position, and how they didn't have that. Like, that was a miss on the league.
Yeah, that is definitely a conversation that I think we'll continue to have. But Donnovan, to your point about, the running backs is the perfect example. Here in Winnipeg right now, Winnipeg's running back depth chart is Andrew Harris from Winnipeg, Brady Oliveira, also from Winnipeg, from the same damn high school in Charleswood, from Oak Park, and Johnny Augustine. Oh, and by the way, Nick Dembski, who was a star at the Bisons, also went to Oak Park. And he's a guy that can run the football and is turning into one of the best Canadian receivers in the league. And from a marketing standpoint, and I'm just speaking to in this market, you have contributing star players that are from the city. That goes a long, long way. But I'm with you. 20 years ago, I wasn't thinking that we would be in a position. So I do think things can change. But I do agree. It's going to take one person to go and show that they're not there because they're Canadian, but they are Canadian. They go and excel. And I think more chances will come to other guys.
Hustler, the head coach of the GM, their passport, what nationality is it?
In Winnipeg, it's Canadian.
Canadian, right?
Well, there has long been the cliche that the teams with the best Canadians are generally the ones that win, right? You know, they make differences. I mean, you hear the term ratio changers out there. Look in the last 10 years, and just recently John Cornish retired. You know, Donnovan, you talk about the running back position, right? We're talking about if we did a redo on the top 50 players in CFL history, you know, we just went through a decade of two of the, you know, top 50 players in CFL history where you would throw John Cornish and Andrew, you know, and you look at what you know, what we're seeing with these running backs over the last little while, right? I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
Well, I'm kind of looking forward to the time where we don't have to get guys off the scrap heap from the National Football League to say that, oh, let's give this guy an opportunity, because it just surprises me. And again, we talk about Donnovan, you talk about the passport, you're talking about Marcel Desjardins. I believe he's a Burlington guy. It surprised me that they made that signing in looking to improve their team. And again, not that Matt Nichols and Dominique Davis are tearing it up, but to me, Duck Hodges isn't the answer.
No, but and you know, look, I mean, you go back to what Hustler's talking about, and even Donnovan alluding to this with the Bombers as well. You know, Canadian. 5 years ago, where Wally Buono made the decision that he did not want to pay Andrew Harris, right? And Andrew Harris felt disrespected, and Winnipeg basically beep beep beep. They back up the Brinks truck and paid that man, right? And the notion, oh, do you want to spend that much money on a running back and give him that kind of money? But I mean, from a community involvement standpoint and from a production standpoint, Andrew Harris has been honestly worth every
Guys, no exaggeration, Cybulski, no
Yeah.
exaggeration.
Yeah.
That might be the most significant free agent signing in the history of the Winnipeg
I think
Blue
it
Bombers.
changed the culture. Yeah, you know what? No, I think you're right.
Donnovan, final words?
Yeah, it's a great point, and hopefully it's one that teams learn from. And we're talking about the teams that, for me, are the class of the league right now. Whether it's Saskatchewan, how they're run from a business ops standpoint and on the football field; Winnipeg, how they're run from a business ops standpoint in the football field. Got Canadians working for the team in influential positions, but on the field making plays. So hopefully others learn as well.
Guys, this has been tremendous. Outstanding opinions, outstanding conversation. This is why so many of us, and again, of course, with myself here, loving the CFL, and of course, the CFL this week, bringing together lovers of the league to talk about it. Donnovan Bennett, Andrew Paterson, and James Cybulski, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you can join us again here on the Ticats Audio Network to do something similar. It's been fantastic. Thanks again, guys.
We just need more players in the league named Duck.
Hey, guys,
The quack attack is coming to the nation's capital.
before we leave, though, guys, just want to, send out, I don't know if it's condolences. I don't know if it's a message to anyone that's watching that's familiar with Ottawa GG's defensive lineman, Francis Perron, who passed away at the conclusion of, at some point after their game against the U of T team here in Toronto. And, to head coach Marcel Belfay, the Ottawa GG's program, friends, family, we're thinking about you. This is, as they say, 25 years old. Certainly, I just say, it's no words can be said. But again, we are thinking about you. And again, this is the CFL This Week from the Tiger Cats Audio Network.